So I was listening to one of my favourite pieces of music recently, and as it reached its really emotional final pages, I thought to myself, this is probably the saddest, most heartbreaking concerto ever written.
Oh, that's so sad.
So I was originally going to post this all as one long video, but I decided instead to split it into a 3-part series. So today's video is going to be all about sadness in music, and we're going to try and figure out what is the saddest instrument in music and what's the best one to use for our sad concerto. Then in a couple of days' time I'll post a video all about concertos and why they're not usually the best place to express sadness. And finally, in the third video, I'll introduce this particular piece to you and give you 10 ways that it flips the rules of concertos on their head and creates a piece that's just filled with melancholy and ends with the most amazing cascade of grief.
Let it out. Keep it in.
So let's talk about sadness in music. And the first thing to say is that what feels sad to me may not feel sad to you. Like all our reactions to music, it's conditioned by our experiences both culturally and personally. I still feel sad when I hear a cheesy love ballad from the 80s called Move Closer, because I heard it on the radio as a kid the morning my dog died. The music of Amy Winehouse feels just a little bit more poignant knowing the tragic end to her story. The music of, say, Schindler's List is very sad, but it's made so much sadder by our associations with the film and what it represents. It's strange that sad music makes us happy. I first noticed this paradox as a teenager listening to the Smiths. Their songs are pretty much all sad. Their melodies are usually little more than a moan, and their songs have titles like Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now.
And I'm never happy and I'm never sad.
I remember thinking, why do I enjoy this feeling of wallowing in misery when I listen to them? And it turns out sadness has always been a big part of music. This is a song by the Renaissance composer John Dowland in an arrangement I did for the Australian Chamber Orchestra a few years ago. Dowland's titles almost sound like Smith's songs, Come Heavy Sleep, In Darkness Let Me Dwell, and this one, Flow My Tears. So wallowing in misery has been an experience we've enjoyed for some time. Singing in particular has always been one of the most direct ways to the human heart when it comes to sad music. Whether it's Dowland or the songs of the Portuguese Fado or the latest song by Adele. In any of these songs, we experience the emotions vicariously through the singer. And our bodies are washed with the same chemicals that they would produce if we were experiencing genuine trauma. We get the benefit without having to experience the pain. Studies have shown music is more effective than anti-anxiety drugs at reducing stress. But if we're going to find our sad concerto, we need to choose an instrument. Which instrument do you think would be the saddest? Of course, it'll be totally subjective, but give it a thought for a second and put your answer in the comments.
Sad, 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 sad.
I asked Twitter a few days ago and got a range of responses. If you're going to focus on the tone of the instrument, well, the duduk has a haunting, sad tone. It's a strong contender. Orchestral winds like the bassoon and the cor anglais also picked up a few votes, I guess for similar reasons. For stringed instruments, there's the Indian sarangi, or the Persian Kamanche. Or for orchestral instruments, actually any of the strings from the violin, viola, cello and bass can make a pretty convincing sad sound. And I think the reason all these instruments seem sad isn't really that hard to pin down. Sad music on the whole imitates the sad sounds we make as human beings. In some cases it's just the actual tone of the instrument. The duduk just sounds inescapably like weeping. It has a fragile, vulnerable tone which sounds almost like someone's voice cracking with emotion. But in other cases, it's the way those instruments are played that creates a sound, an effect that seems like a sob, a sigh, a wail, a moan, or a groan. Klezmer music uses little ghost notes called krechts, I think that's how you say it, which literally means sobs. The music is so full of them it feels existentially sad, as one tweet put it. Even when it has a happy phrase, it's still sad. So what we're saying is that most human sounds made in sadness, like a sob or a sigh, have a musical contour, a shape which translates quite easily onto an instrument. And this translation works particularly well when that instrument has the ability to play in smooth, continuous lines rather than distinct notes. Something like, say, a mandolin has frets to map out the individual notes. The strings don't bend very much, so it's hard to make any of these sounds. I didn't get many tweets mentioning the sadness of a fretted instrument.
Isn't that a happy sound?
But of course, instruments like the sarangi and the Comanche, and of course the violin and the cello, have no frets. The pitch can move up and down with almost total freedom, very much like the human voice. So I'm going to say that in a classical music context at least, that because of this greater flexibility of pitch and the greater expressive flexibility that gives them, the strings just have the edge when it comes to sadness. And then you've got the register of the instrument. And again, it's sounds that feel like the range of a human voice that give us the strongest emotional connection. And in the strings, the cello has a range that matches the human voice almost exactly. At the lower end, it reaches down to a low C, which is pretty much exactly the lowest note humans can sing. You can hear notes down there sung by Russian basso profundos. And at the very top of the fingerboard, you can reach up to an E or an F. Again, that's right at the top of the human vocal range. That F is the famous ridiculously high top note in Mozart's Queen of the Night aria. And secondly, there's a property the cello has that I think makes it seem particularly human. Its size. The proportions of the cello are probably the closest to the size of the human body, or the torso at least, of any instrument. So sounds coming from something this size, I think, just seem more relatably human than other instruments. So we found an instrument that seems really well suited to expressing sad sounds. It has the physical proportions and the range to match a human singer, as well as that flexibility of pitch that allows it to produce expressive moans and cries. But I think there's one more feature it has that really seals the deal. This is probably the most famous solo piece for the cello. It's the prelude from Bach's Cello Suite No. 1. You can hear how there's a combination of warmth and depth in the cello tone, so that even if the music is quite light-hearted sometimes, there's a sense of reserve or of contemplation. Listening to a whole cello suite takes on something of a meditative quality. But what's that tone got to do with sadness? Well, remember at the start how we talked about experiencing the emotions vicariously in sad music. We want our music to relate to the sound of a human cry, but we're not looking for the real thing. We don't go to concerts just to hear people cry.
Thank you.
That warm, meditative tone the cello has allows us to enjoy the sound of sadness, to wallow in it. The Portuguese have a name for the feeling. They call it saudade, a kind of glad to be unhappy, sad, nostalgic feeling. And when it comes to bathing in a warm glow of sadness, I think we can all agree, amongst the orchestral instruments at least, the cello has few rivals.